Is a professor of computer science and the director of the Institute for Computational Sustainability at Cornell University. Academically, she started in applied mathematics and at the Technical University in Lisbon in Portugal, and then completed her PhD in computer science at the University of Edinburgh. She recently received a AAAI Classic Paper Award for boosting combinatorial search through randomization presented at the 15th National Conference on Artificial Intelligence, and she's also recently made a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. We're really excited to hear about the work she's been doing in computational sustainability. There are multiple people throughout this campus who wanted to talk with her, and because of the possible interactions and interconnectedness and that we find in computational sustainability. So please join me in welcoming Carla to the University of Utah.
Hi, I'm delighted to be here, and thank you so much, Chris and Ross, for the invitation. You know, this is a very impressive place. I'm really amazed with all the exciting work that you are doing. It's, you know, what I'm trying to push is so different, but I feel there are so many connections, so there are so many possibilities for interaction, so that is very exciting. And indeed, I'm going to talk about computational sustainability, and, you know, I actually now start my talks by thanking NSF profoundly because, you know, not that many agencies fund sustainability work. Unfortunately, you know, maybe that's not sometimes very sexy, but NSF actually gave us a large expeditions. Expeditions are programs similar to centers, but not really like a center. And we received a first expedition back in 2008 to really, where, you know, the idea of expeditions is that they want you to put forward a wild vision for computer science. And, you know, a chance of you getting is so small that you decide to really go wild. And that's what we put forward, you know, the idea of creating the field of computational sustainability, and I'll talk a little bit about it. But in a nutshell is, you know, computer science is permeating all aspects of your life and revolutionizing the world. Why not sustainability too? And so we were able to get that first expedition, and we were able to, you know, set the seeds and nucleate the field. But, you know, you cannot create a field in 5 years. Maybe you can establish seeds. So we then went for a second expedition, which very difficult, but somehow we managed to get a second expedition that we are now starting. So it's a large group, and basically, we are now in the second phase, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about computational sustainability, but then I want to actually give you give you a bit of the background how we got into this, and highlight some interesting research problems. But so, as I mentioned before, you know, computational sustainability is really a field that the big vision is to advance computational methods for sustainable development. I'm not sure if you are familiar with the notion of sustainable development. This was introduced back in '87 by the Brundtland Commission that was led by a woman, Gro Brundtland, and basically, you know, they state sustainability and sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. So, you know, this definition in itself already talks about we need to plan the present thinking in terms of the future. So, you know, dynamics, that is really, you see, it introduces complexity. But more interestingly, you know, they stressed that, you know, sustainability is not just to worry about climate or environment. No, it is really, sustainable development encompasses balancing, environmental, economical, and societal needs. And in the end, really, the ultimate goal of sustainable development is human well-being, but for us to achieve human well-being of the current and future generations, we really need to think about all these aspects and the interconnects of these aspects. So basically, so for us to manage these complex systems, we are really dealing with problems that are unique in scale and complexity. We are trying to predict and manage the systems. In order to understand the systems, we need to collect large volumes of data, typically from heterogeneous sources at multiple scales. We have to be able to deal with uncertainty, and obviously we have several agents involved with complex dynamics and conflicting interests. So clearly there are many computational challenges, and a key challenge is actually how to create and effectively establish these large-scale interdisciplinary projects, which you are very familiar with, I have to say, but that's not the norm in computer science. I have to say that. But I think you have managed to also develop these large-scale collaborations. And I think this is very exciting because you can have impact in different fields, while by studying these problems, we can really identify new research challenges that will advance the field. And given all these challenges, we propose a large-scale research network that was the CompSys network for NSF. So we basically are focusing, we have 3 core sustainability themes. One area is the area of conservation and biodiversity, where, we have projects. Our projects are very much, determined by our collaborators and the people we interact with. I'm sure the same happens here. So, for example, Cornell has this amazing the lab of ornithology, so that's why we do a lot of bird conservation. But we are also working on, wildlife corridors and protecting endangered species. We have several efforts in terms of balanced socioeconomic needs, in terms of poverty mitigation, poverty mapping, inferring poverty levels from satellite images, etc. But we also, in fact, our new effort added this component, especially renewable energy and sustainable materials. And here we are interested in, for example, accelerating the discovery of new materials, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So, basically we have over 20 interdisciplinary research projects, and you may think that this is like a quilt with, a billion different projects, so how are they connected? But, part of the vision was really to try to create, to bring together different applications, but where there would be common themes. And again, I love for example, one of your common themes is visualization. It's not ours is not as simple as that, but that is a beautiful thing that brings together. But I do think that, by working in different domains and extracting these cross-cutting computational problems, that really makes it very rich for computer science to be exposed to different domains and apply. So for you to see, we actually focus on, as I said, 3 computational themes, that is optimization, dynamical models, and a bit of simulation. Big data and machine learning, that is obviously a big theme nowadays. And also this area of multi-agent systems, citizen science, and crowdsourcing, and I'll talk about that, especially when it comes to sustainability. It's very difficult to get good data. Nobody is going to pay for it, so you really need to use this crowdsourcing and citizen science projects. So what I find exciting about this is, by having all these interdisciplinary projects, we see on one hand, we have, challenge, and if you go for a NSF proposal, you know that you need to use the word transformative. That is an NSF word. But indeed, truly, what I see here, and because we are really driven by real challenges. It's not just, let's have a synthetic world and we stop there. No, we really want to solve the real problems. We cannot just work on, optimization and ignore the data. We really see interesting challenge across standard research areas, for example, in computer science. And I'll talk a little bit about that. And in this talk, what I decided to do is I'm going to be a little biased, focus more on, Cornell-centered projects because, I come from Cornell, but also give you, real examples how we built this area starting with little projects. And so I'll talk about, a project actually in sustainable agriculture, dynamic conservation. And, Cornell has, you may not know, even though Cornell is both a state university and a private university. So we actually have the land mission. Are you familiar with the Utah University is private? It's state, so you probably have a similar mission, correct? No? Yes. So a lot of our applications were driven actually by the state side of Cornell, for example. Even the Lab of O is part of Cornell, the agriculture, etc. But then we add other projects. But we really started this with even a very simple application, and I'll talk about conservation and biodiversity, and then materials discovery and renewable energy. But to give you a sense of, and this is important, how can you make sense of this from a computational point of view? How can you, because remember actually, this expedition is funded by computer science. So, and they are fascinated and they love it that we are addressing sustainability questions, but we do need to show that we are advancing computer science. And so here we have an inverted perspective where the lines, and I'll talk about these projects, each line is a computational theme. And then we have several projects along this line. For example, we have, pattern identifying, patterns in big data. And, like matrix factorization, etc. This is this blue line where, for example, we do high throughput material structure identification or identifying elephant calls from recordings, etc. I'll be talking about these projects. So, but and basically what, the students work on a particular theme, a particular line, and then typically, not just a single project. They have different projects, and that makes it exciting for them to show how the methods can be applied across different areas. So let me now go back to, a much lower level, just to instantiate, and I also want to show how, deep research questions can emerge from, these problems. And here is, as I mentioned, Cornell has this land-grant mission, and, a big area, in fact, I think Cornell has had one of the first departments of agriculture economics, or, really, agriculture is a big part of Cornell. And, one of the, as you may know, fertilizers have revolutionized our world and increased food production dramatically, but they are really key culprits in terms of production of greenhouse gas emissions, creating these dead zones. And in fact, for example, the US agriculture contributes 1% to the GDP, but 8% of greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a lot of, and typically what you see is farmers use way more fertilizers than they need. And so one project that is led by Harold Van Ness at Cornell is, how to develop models to monitor and, determine the right amount of fertilizer that you need, not too much, not too little, so that factoring in the particular conditions of the soil, climate, etc. So, this is quite a complex project, but I'm going to actually mention a very small part of it that was, how can we even try to understand the impact of fertilizers? And this was a problem that was, we were interested in designing experiments to study fertilizers. And if in statistics, commonly to design experiments, we use Latin squares, because then you can make sure that everybody, for example, if you have Tom and Mary and Angela and Anne trying experimental drug on different days of the week, they are going to be subject to the different drugs, so they all are subject to the same treatments. And that's what they do. However, for agronomic experiments, they also need to factor in the geometry of the field, so they want to also make sure that every pair of treatment is subject to the same variability. For example, here you see the red and green are 1 apart in this configuration. Here they are 4 apart. Here they are 3 apart, etc. So the total distance for the pair along the rows is 14. So you want everybody to be subject to the same conditions. I mean, it really doesn't matter. It's just a more complex structure that they want to generate these designs. And I have to admit, at the time, I thought this would be a trivial problem, because, it's just a simple little thing. It turns out that generating these squares is not that easy. Just, you may have seen Latin squares in so many ways, and for example, if you play Sudoku, imagine that Sudoku is a Latin square with an initial block constraint. So in addition to the no repetition in a row and in a column, you now have to use the different digits in a block. So a Latin square is really, as I forgot to say, is basically, you have, in this case, you have a 6 by 6, so you have 6 colors, and you cannot repeat the color in a row or in a column. A Sudoku is the same, but now you have the initial block constraint that you have to do this. So the spatially balanced Latin square, you have other constraints, and you would think, well, I can generate Sudokus very easily. I can generate Latin squares. Why not spatially balanced Latin squares? It turns out that this is not easy. I mean, we tried all kinds of models, different encodings, etc., and we could not really generate spatially balanced Latin squares for order greater than 9. And they wanted to try about 35 experiments. So this was a real problem, and we, because we wanted to solve the real problem, we needed to do something about it, and we did. And basically, we start trying all kinds of simulations, local search, simulating the annealing, etc., and nothing would work. And then we would, basically what we did, we generated all solutions, for example, for order 6, and we realized that a ton of the solutions had other properties like symmetry, Then we said, okay, now why don't we ask for spatially balanced Latin squares that are symmetric? And now we could generate order 8 and 9. And so then, we kept doing all kinds of tricks columns, literally. Oh, then I even love this problem because I had a major accident. So I was in the hospital for 2 weeks, but I couldn't walk, and I could really think about this problem. That was amazing. So it helped me. So and then I start, thinking, well, why don't we imagine that I'm going to create a big square where I combine, I have a Latin square of a certain order. I copy this and relabel the columns, and then I'm going to say, now I'm going to produce a big one just by using these columns. I mean, so you see, this was really, hacking and just looking. And so, but the amazing thing is that we were able to produce Latin squares of up to order 35. But then as a computer scientist, you can't really write about, just some random ideas. You need to think about what you've done. And I think this is actually an important exercise for students to say, let's try now to, go a level up, and what did we do? And so we came up with this idea of streamlined reasoning. And basically what we had done was, we have a problem, and in order to solve it for larger sizes, we kept adding constraints to narrow the search space. So initially I wanted spatially balanced Latin squares. Then I say, oh, I want now Latin squares that are symmetric. Now I want Latin squares that are symmetric and do all kinds of properties. And basically we call this streamlined reasoning. And by doing this, we could produce larger and larger squares. And in fact, we were able to go all the way to order 35. So we were very happy. And then we tried this idea to solve other little problems, because when you write a paper, you have to, come up with an approach. And then ideally, you want to show that it works in 3 different domains. That's what I tell my students. We need to do that. And we could do this, but, it was still very domain specific. So how do we go about this? This was not very satisfying, because it was really, for each domain, you would have to think about what kinds of constraints you could add to the problem. So can we do this in an independent way? But because we had, really, and this sometimes sounds that we are, you just come up with names. Now, then you start thinking, we call this streamlined reasoning. Then we start thinking, can we do this streamlined reasoning in an independent way? And then we proposed XOR streamlining. And basically, that was inspired by a very, very important work, actually, negative results by Valiant and Vassarini, where, they wanted to show that satisfiability or unique satisfiability is still hard. It's like Sudoku. Sudoku is a problem that you are told a priori that Sudoku only has one solution, correct? If you played Sudoku. Because you know that it only has one solution, is the problem easier? It turns out that it's not. Actually, Sudoku is still NP hard, even though that it has one unique solution. And the way they proved this was by using these parity constraints, and basically to illustrate this idea, imagine that I want to count the number of people in this room. There are many ways to do. I can do the brute force way, where I count one by one. Or I can do divide this into little rooms and approximate the count in each section. Or I can do a very different way, that what I'm going to suggest now. I give everybody a coin, and I tell everybody to toss a coin. And basically, so everybody raises the hand, and if you toss a coin and if heads, you keep the hand up. If tails, you bring it down. Now, we repeat this in several rounds. After, when I only have one hand up, now I can estimate that the number of people in this room is 2 to the number of rounds, correct? So this is exactly the strategy that we are going to use here. We thought about using this strategy where basically we are trying to find solutions in this big search space. We are going to, partition the search space in half every time using these XOR constraints. This is basically this flipping a coin. You can think, everybody has a coin. You can think of it of a parity constraint or a hash function that divides exactly the search space into a half. But the good news is I can divide my search place into a half, but keeping all the constraints of the problem, which is what typical simulation methods don't do. They don't know how to factor in the constraints. So, and if you do this, throw these parity constraints, now you use these XOR constraints, you need to satisfy some properties, and I don't think it's irrelevant, the technicalities, but you can actually, provide guarantees, and, if you have, let's say, a problem that has M solutions, and you are going to add S rounds of this flip coining, S equals to the log 2 of M, then you can infer that when you get to the end of the process, you will have 2 to the S solutions. Anyway, so, this is an example of a technique that it started with fertilizers, with concrete constraints, and then now we use these very general parity constraints to model the search space, and in fact we can get good guarantees in terms of the number of solutions, etc. And I use this example. This all started with the fertilizers. We have done a lot of work, and including we've had several, even the best paper starting with this. Our students have further pushed this in terms of using, hashing functions for probabilistic reasoning, etc. And it all started trying to solve a real problem, this fertilizer problem. And this is actually a key area of when you are trying to find solutions or sampling, because in the end, finding solutions, sampling or counting, all these problems are related. So let me now move on to a completely different topic, and I'm going to now talk about conservation. And this is another area that I mentioned before. I mentioned that we have the Lab of Ornithology at Cornell, and basically they have this amazing program that is called the eBirds. And the birders are really fanatic, and so they are really amazing citizen science. We have these numbers are probably now old, but over 300,000 volunteer birders. They have submitted millions of observations, and just for you to see, this over 22 million hours of field work, which is a lot of years of field work. And this is important because we use all this data combined with environmental data to really try to understand how species birds. Yes. So are you on a bird? Oh, you are. Oh, that's good. So I'm going to tell you about a new game that we have. So, but it is, in fact, this is a very interesting story, because when eBird started, everybody, or ecologists, biologists, they really didn't think much of eBird, because they would say, yeah, these people are not professionals, the data are not good, etc., etc. So they kind of underestimated. What happens is and all those issues are true, because and they are problematic, because indeed eBird, anybody can submit observations. So you have children, you have grown-ups, you have experts, you have people who know nothing about. So the quality is an issue. But once you start having huge volumes of data, well, now things are changing, and in fact, we can now use this data with machine learning models, and we can have a very good, understanding how birds are distributed across landscapes. Indeed, there are challenges, and I'm going to give you, well, but before that, I want to tell you an example of how these now can be used. Number one, we are actually, and the lab of all eBird, heavily involved in this, the production of the State of the Birds report that is actually officially released by the Secretary of Interior. But now with these accurate models, distribution models, you can think of fundamentally different ways of doing bird conservation. And as an example is, the Nature Conservancy has this program called Bird Returns, and basically they are trying to protect migratory birds, water birds in California against the drought. And, the typical way, of conserving land is to buy land. But I mean, for birds, you would have to buy the entire planet. So, but now we go with these fine-grained models, we can actually predict, the trajectories of the birds and exactly when they are going to cross, for example, Sacramento Valley. So the Nature Conservancy has this program using combinatorial reverse auctions where the farmers can submit bids to keep the rice field flooded during the bird migration. So it's kind of renting the fields while the birds are traveling. So this is a very different way of doing conservation. And in fact, using these models and this market-based approach, now the TNC can generate additional acres of habitat for water birds in California, coinciding with the bird migration. Of course, for example, there's still uncertainty. We would like to be able to, quantify that better. But things now, this is now happening for real. And this is really possible because now we have, these very accurate models, pretty decent, that can give you, a good idea of the times when the birds are crossing Sacramento Valley. And, it's, if Wall Street can use these super sophisticated models for, for Wall Street stuff, why don't we use this for sustainability? And this is, I think, a good example. Well, we have similar projects, for example, in Africa. Africa is actually, we couldn't do this in Africa because while here we have very good maps of the environment, all these environmental data, and these maps, land cover, etc., based on LCD, the Landsat, the land cover satellite. We don't have good maps in Africa, so we are developing similar problems where, like we have this little graze it where, the pastoralists or herders submit data. We are trying to produce better models. One big problem, and this is really a bit of a challenge, is the data bias problem in eBird, because obviously, in order to get people to submit data, we cannot be very demanding and very picky, So basically, there are no restrictions. You can submit the data wherever you are, whenever you are. And if you look at this map, that you can almost see, the cities, and you see this is old. It's now better than this. But you see, there's really the submissions. These are eBird's observations in the US, and they pretty much coincide with where people live, the cities. So how can we get people to go to collect and submit observations from other places? So we came up with a game that actually you may have heard of. What is it called? The Pokemon Go? We came up with this web actually before them, but they are way more popular than we are. But the idea is we are going to design a game where we want to incentivize people to go to the places that are undersampled. And this is called, in fact, we used what it's called the principal agent model. It's like a game theoretical model. And in fact, this line of research started, and it's used by, monopolies, where they want to set the price in a way that, people are going to buy a lot of stuff, but not going too far that they stop buying. So basically, they want to incentivize people to increase their bottom line. Now, here, what we want to do is we want to place some incentives and basically get people to go to the places that are under sample. But in order to do that, we need to learn about people's utilities and interests, etc. So we want to optimize and place the incentives taking into consideration, people's interests. So this becomes like a two-level game where I need to place the incentives knowing that the borders that you are going to see the incentives and you are going to maximize your own utility knowing the incentives. So I need to put the incentives to induce a behavior that is going to generate an overall uniform distribution. This has been very successful. We started this in 3 counties, and we were able to actually, you see, spread people a little more. And now, actually, there are people in California and in different places starting these avi caching games. Just for you to see, basically the idea here is you have the organizer that is going to place the rewards subject to a budget, but also subject to the fact that the agents have their own intrinsic utilities. So how should you place these external rewards to make people move to, so that people do what you want them to do, which is to go to the undersample places. So this is, you can think of this as a dynamic, on one hand, you want to minimize the variance of the submissions, and you know that the agents, they want to maximize their own utilities. So you have these 2 problems working together. So how can you go about this? Technically, again, maybe this is a little more technical than necessary, but the point is we had to find a way of embedding. Basically, you can represent the problem of the borders with a declarative encoding, and basically you can fold the problem of the agent into the problem of the organizer. So we just have a single problem. If you are following, embeddings are becoming quite a hot topic. In fact, we had this was appeared in a NIPS paper this year. But the results have been quite amazing, because we have been, as I said, to actually really move people, and now we can affect a bit the behavior. And the way we do it is very simple. We basically put points, and people collect. They go to the places to see the birds. Obviously, I think ultimately that's what they are interested in, but then they collect points. And then at the end, there's a leaderboard for the new places that don't have any observation. So you have a chance to become the leader, to be at the top of the list for the different places. And you also collect points, and there's a lottery that you get binoculars or something. And we discovered that, people actually like it because often this is, because they are competitive, that's what borders are, that there's a competition about this, and they end up exploring new places. I mean, it has been really, really exciting and very successful, this heavy caching, that it started, we started in Ithaca and counties around Ithaca, obviously, because it was easy, but now we are we have the Labo is setting it up different areas. For example, I think in California, they are thinking of doing, they want to know, to collect more data to see the impact of some solar, installing some solar panels, etc. I don't remember the details, but very exciting. And, once here, what I show is, if you now, this is the ground truth that basically we consider the ground truth, all the data. This is a small data set with heavy caching, with data from these heavy caching places. And you see they are similar. And this is a small data set without the heavy caching data. And you see, like in this case, I mean, it under predicts the occurrence of this bird, and here it over predicts the occurrence of this bird. So once you start doing heavy caching, your predictions become better. So, computationally speaking, this problem was interesting because basically the key core idea was, how can I fold the problem of the agent into the problem of the organizer? And then, basically here I talk about how we use the same idea, for example, to design wildlife corridors, and where here again there's a minimization to, I mean, these problems become, it's a maximization problem and an expectation problem. So this is an NP-hard problem and a Sharp-P complete problem. So there's two levels that, so similar to the heavy caching game, and inspired by that, we were able to solve this problem with similar techniques of folding the second problem into the big problem, and we also show that we can do this for other problems. And it is, basically, I don't want to give you the details, but I really go by this idea, when we have a problem, first we need to solve the real problem, then we need to think about how we solved it and generalize it and find other, that's always what I tell my students. If you want to go to NIPS, yeah, you need to not just do an application. So you need to show how it generalizes. And basically, we show how this technique was initially developed for the heavy caching game, and now we can design corridors or even solve machine learning problems with a similar technique. And basically, when you have, think of this as stochastic optimization problem with two levels, how you can embed this problem into that one and have like a flattened single problem. And that's what we did here. So let me now wrap up. I realize that I'm taking a little longer, and but I wanted to talk a little bit about this materials discovery domain that's quite different. And basically, for example, recently, 6 years ago, there was a report, the DOE, stating that existing energy approaches will not be enough to secure our energy future. So we need, in order to meet the challenge, we need scientific breakthroughs in new materials. And we are working with, with Cornell and Caltech, Caltech, actually, the Joint Center for Artificial Photosynthesis, on solar fuel generators. But, from a computational point of view, to give you basically the story here, the problem that we are focusing on is, material science can now synthesize thousands and thousands of materials simultaneously. They use this technique called co-sputtering, which is similar to atomic spray painting. Here you see an apparatus where there are 3 guns, and you can, these 3 guns with 3 metals, you can sputter them onto the silicon wafer. And so once they produce, and they create what they call the library of materials, and then once they create this, now they need to characterize the materials, and one of the ways they do it is X-ray diffraction, synchrotron-based X-ray diffraction. This is actually a computer science student doing these experiments. And basically, so what is the key problem? Well, now once you have the X-ray diffraction patterns, and in the end, what they really want to know is the crystal structure of the material. So they want to infer the crystal structure based on the X-ray diffraction patterns. Here, this is a representation of the wafer in a composition space. And basically, we get these X-ray diffraction patterns. And, each little point here has an X-ray diffraction pattern. And from here, you want to infer these different areas of different crystal structures that you can think of this almost as a clustering. But, if you go clustering, you will see that, in fact, that's what material science we're using. It really doesn't work because clustering does not, we cannot enforce the constraints of the domain. So, but basically, the key question is, given the X-ray diffraction patterns, infer the crystal structures of your materials if it is an FCC crystal structure, etc. So, why is this challenging? Well, because you have areas here where you have different crystal structures get mixed up. So, for example, you see here, this is a combination of alpha and beta. So here is a mix alpha and beta. So demixing this is not easy. And in fact, here I have another representation because I thought I'm going to highlight an angle of this project related to the citizen science that I thought would be interesting. So here what you have, these are different points with the X, for example, this is point A that has this X-ray diffraction pattern, but you can also, represent this with a heat map, and then you can stack the spectrograms or the heat map, and then if you look at this, a human can visualize some interesting patterns. You see that, these little things, even though I haven't told you what it means, but clearly there's some interesting grouping there. And in fact, this is an indication of a phase. And, to understand this problem, and I know you are teaching a course on matrix factorization, basically you can think of this problem as a matrix factorization problem, where each sample is an X-ray diffraction pattern. So all these samples you get here, you can put them in a matrix where here each column is a sample, and here are the angles of diffraction. And what you really want to do is you want to decompose this matrix into 2 matrices where these are the bases, the key crystal structures or bases, and here is where they occur. But, standard, and because of the physics, this is non-negative matrix factorization. But, the standard techniques, really, they are okay, but they fail to enforce the several critical constraints about how the light is diffracted, etc. So that's what we've been working on. And maybe because of my background, I go for very formal models, etc., and where we actually develop models capturing all the constraints, etc. But, matrix factorization runs very fast. This doesn't. And that's why you have all these fast matrix factorization techniques. But, we realized, but the standard techniques, they really don't capture all the combinatorics of the problem. So then what we discovered was that using these models and giving people, the lay people, these little plots, they can actually very easily, as I said, identify some interesting patterns. And we actually develop a methodology to crowdsource the annotation of these graphs. And you see here, for example, here, a human can clearly see this pattern, and you don't get bad, there's a ton of noise here that, your algorithm is trying to justify because the algorithm thinks that there are peaks there, but this is just background noise from the wafer. But the human clearly tells you, no, look, I only see these peaks, and if you pass this information to your solver, what we discovered was that we could go, from 13 hours of computation to a few minutes just with this minimal input from the user. And basically, it's a long story. I'm not going to go there, but we've done actually work on what we call backdoors. And basically, the humans visually identify key variables. Once they are instantiated, everything is done by propagation, kind of, so trivially. So that was a very interesting experiment. And in fact, we solved here, we have a real system. You see here, all these things are peaks detected by the peak detector, but you see, we ignore them because we see this is noise. And, based on the input from the users, we could solve this problem, and actually, we could even, our collaborators, doing the real material science.
Do your constraints include sort of spatial coherence?
Yeah, our spatial, exactly. Exactly. Our constraints include things like, if I have two spectrograms, they are considered the same if they are shifted. So shifting is allowed and it's similar. So if you are going to, or, there's also the constraint that it's called Gibbs phase rule that says that any point of a sample, you cannot have more. For example, a given point can be explained by at most, because you only have three elements, three phases, so three factors. There are all these constraints that fall apart in the standard. But I'm going to actually, we've done, that's a whole different story. I was going to update this, but I lost my charger. So we actually have now done work using more NMF and convolution NMF work, and we are combining that with little modules to factor in and impose the constraints that actually now are very fast, and we heavily use actually NMF and convolution NMF combining with other things. But indeed, that's exactly the kinds of constraints that you have to factor in. And in general, it doesn't make much difference, but here they actually need, if you don't present them a solution that is physically meaningful, it just doesn't make any sense. So if you are trying to justify, let's say, a point with 5 phases, they will tell you, no, that's not physically meaning because you can only have 3. But then if there's alloying, then you lose another degree of freedom. So, there are all these little constraints, exactly. That's exactly the point. So, but, so this was, so basically this led to the discovery of a new catalyst that is platinum-free. But again, this is, by the way, this is an example where every week I meet with the material science. And it took us 6 years to really get to this point where now we in fact, we just had a paper that is the cover of the journal, and it is editor's choice, etc. But it did take us several years to get into this domain. And but what and how do I get? What's the spin here? Well, I told you that I show you the subway line. And so basically, this is an inverse problem where I'm given, the X-ray diffraction patterns, and I want to infer crystal structures. We also have, other projects. For example, the elephant listening project. And basically, here we have recordings from the forest, and the goal is to monitor elephants. And one way of trying to estimate populations rather than counting them by hand or going there, it's actually, having these recordings, detecting elephant calls, and this is a good proxy for you to estimate how many there are. Guess what? These two problems are completely different, but in the end, essentially, they have a lot in common. Both involve the decomposition of a signal into the patterns. Here, I'm given a signal and I want to decompose into crystal structures. Here, I'm given a signal and I want to separate the elephant calls from the frog calls, from the plane, etc. So I have the students working on this problem. They also work on this problem. So that is exactly part of this blue line that I've showed you in the beginning, where you have completely different problems but with common computational problems. So let me wrap up and say that this has been really, really quite an adventure. We have produced lots of papers and also placed students in industry and faculty positions. But, no matter what, I really think that, for computer science to get into this area, it does take time to get involved in these highly interdisciplinary areas. And that's why we propose this expedition. And it takes time, but it is worth it, because then you develop, a portfolio of problems. And I think that you have a very similar thing here. And then you can do beautiful things. I look at your, all your pictures, and I mean, you are doing amazing work. But I'm sure that it was not overnight, correct, Chris? So, but I talk about my metaphor is, like you probably remember Bell Labs. They did amazing research driven by solving real problems, communications, telephones, etc. My view is I want to advance computer science driven by, real sustainability problems. And we have, in addition to research, we have a big part of our effort is really building a community, because, we want, for example, as outreach, etc. For example, we created the CompSys track to make sure that the students can publish, because we all know we need publications. And for example, AAAI has this. In fact, we have this here, CompSys at the AAAI, where that's a way where the students can submit papers, and it is going to be reviewed with understanding that's computational sustainability, but you can start producing papers early on, which is important for the students. And, basically, I see this sustainability, really computational sustainability, as a two-way street. On one hand, we hope to inject computational thinking that provide new insights, methodologies, and solutions to address sustainability questions. But frankly, on the other hand, and this is maybe even more important for us, because we learn a lot. We get lots of challenging problems from the sustainability domains, but we also learn about, typically actually we interact with very, smart people, in different areas, biology, physics, social science, etc. And often they have actually very interesting formulations and concepts, but they are not very rich from a computation point of view. That's where we come in. But we end up learning a lot. And so this is, it is very exciting, and hopefully we can also have societal impact. Well, thank you so much.